If you really go out with a singular story, a singular piece of content, and a singular narrative, there's a lot of people that's going to go right past them. And if you're doing that as a B2B marketer, there's a lot of people in your target audience that you can convert into an opportunity for you, but you can't do it with one message. You've got to go out there with different messages, because certain things are going to resonate. Certain things are going to have that point of epiphany at different moments. And if you go out with one, you might just bypass 50% of the target you wanted to go after, and they're not going to help you.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
It's my pleasure to be here today with my old friend Cory Treffiletti, who is an SVP at FIS. And so to provide context for today's conversation, why don't you sort of explain your role and responsibilities at FIS and anything you've done previously that you think we might touch on?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. So at FIS is a really large fintech company, probably the largest fintech company in the world, part of the S&P 500, been around for about 50 years, and supplies a lot of the technology for banking software, capital markets software, banks and traders, as well as the largest merchant payment processing platform in the world, which is actually WorldPay. So FIS really powers something along the lines of 95% of the world's banks, and it touches about $10 trillion in money movement around the world globally, and that's on an annual basis. So it's just really a big company in the fintech ecosystem. Prior to being at FIS, I've been here for about 2 years. Prior to that, I have a whole serial of being entrepreneur into big companies. So I was the CMO for Blue Kai, which we sold to Oracle. Then went to go help with the launch and building of a company called Voicea, which we built an AI note-taking assistant, which we sold to Cisco. Prior to all that, I was an agency guy, helped sell iTraffic, which is one of the first digital agencies, Freestyle Interactive, which we sold to Kara. So I've kind of done a little bit of this and a little bit of that along the way.
All right, well, that's quite a history, and I'm sure it all comes in handy when you try to figure out how to allocate human capital and dollar capital for FIS into the marketing ecosystem. One thing I had sort of a question just popped in as I was sort of prepping for the podcast, which was that I know you're really into storytelling, and B2B marketers often ignore storytelling. They're like, "Oh no, we're just a B2B SaaS or B2B service or whatever," and they sort of leave out the storytelling. Where does storytelling fit into the B2B marketer's toolbox?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, because you're right. I think, and one of the things that attracts me to B2B in general is that people don't look at it as a storytelling medium. But the first thing to keep in mind is that the people who are buying B2B products are also everyday consumers. They're buying everyday consumer products, and we know that those folks react well to a story. They react well to a narrative that helps them understand, how does this product or this service fit into their day? How does it solve a challenge that they face on a regular basis? And storytelling enables you to do that from a more entertaining perspective versus just listing benefits and hoping that one of those benefits resonates with the audience. So I find, first of all, that just storytelling as a tool or a mechanism itself separates you from other B2B companies. Now, what I typically refer to myself as is a data-driven storyteller, which is even more far-fetched for people to understand. But what I believe in is that you should hypothesize a story based on your understanding of the audience or the persona of the audience you're trying to talk to. Then you test it. You put it into the market, you see how it resonates, and you take the positive signals from that testing back in to continue to refine your story. That's data-driven storytelling, and it's actually not a new concept. If you go back to the genesis of storytelling, how education, how information has been passed down from generation to generation is always through stories. You can literally go back to cave person days and to today. Everything is about stories, and stories change generation to generation. They always change a little bit because they have to be refined to resonate with the audience you're talking to. You can even look at the story of Santa Claus. The concept of Santa Claus has changed a little bit year after year and generation after generation because it has to resonate with the audience. I kind of look at the way that you tell a story from a B2B perspective with that audience of the B2B buyer in a way that resonates with them. So you tailor the story a little bit more to them each time you talk to them. So at some point they raise their hand and say, I'm interested. And data helps you to resonate that story each touch point through the path and through the journey. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sort of wondering, when you decide, okay, let's do some B2B storytelling, whether you're doing it for FIS or just a friend of yours says, hey, help me tell a story for my business. Do you find that sort of there's a journey from the creative process around, like, bullet pointing or scripting? Do you feel like visual storyboards are an important part of that? Or is it very different depending on, where you're coming at the creative process? Because some people are very visual. And so they can't even articulate the story unless it's storyboarded. Other people are like, oh no, if it's just scripted out, that's great. So, blank whiteboard, right? And somebody says, okay, we're going to do B2B storytelling. Where do you start?
Well, the first place that I would start always is you got to go talk to your customers. You got to ask them, what is it that attracted them to you in the first place? What is it that got them over the hump from just awareness and perception to some sort of consideration or intent? What is it that got them interested in you in the first place? So asking the customers and even asking the prospects who are in that flow still, asking them what made the point of epiphany, as I kind of call it, what was the thing that put them over the hump for that? If you get that piece of information, then you start to hypothesize, how do I tell that story? How do I insert that story into a longer form narrative over time? And then to your specific question, I do believe in a visual way to display that. I like trying to talk about what's a decision tree look like, and at what point do you have those points of epiphany throughout the course of that journey? Because we know that any kind of journey, whether it's a customer journey or a B2B customer journey, they are not linear. People are going to bounce around. They're going to talk to different people. There's different touches. You can't control the journey, but you can control what messages are displayed to them at certain points in the journey. And based on the context of, if it's in search, they're probably not doing initial consideration. They've already done some of that. So how do you insert the information to them during a search environment that's going to get them over the hump versus maybe in a software review site area or in a community? You want to insert different types of messages in each of those touches. So I think you start early on with that customer, asking them the questions, but I do like the sort of visual mapping of the customer journey, and at least once again, hypothesizing which stories or which elements of the story are going to resonate when, and then testing it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm curious if you and your team are going to be out there talking to existing customers anyway in this sort of data gathering and epiphany gathering exercise. Do you sort of ask for the testimonials at the same time and then use those as part of your creation process, content creation process?
Yeah, that comes up a lot because every B2B marketer is the bane of their existence is trying to get customers to go out and talk about them, to get testimonials. So I do think there's a quid pro quo. So when we go out to talk to a customer to ask them these kinds of questions, there's two things that we're doing right off the bat. We're going to lead with information that we think is of interest to them. And by the way, it's not a sales pitch. As an example, in the last couple of weeks, I met with 3 different customers, and we talked to them about embedded finance and how that is a massive trend in the fintech and financial services space, about embedding these types of experiences in remote locations where the customer wants them. So we use that educational context to get in front of our customers, to talk to them, to give them something to think about, something to chew on. Then during that process, we basically get permission to ask them more questions about how they think that resonates in their relationship with us, or how has the relationship we have with them, how has that progressed over time? And then you might get a testimonial out of that conversation, or it's not that pure asking for the testimonial and saying, why did you choose us? It's just throughout the course of the conversation, they might offer up some of that information, offer up some of that point of view. And in doing so, then you ask permission, hey, could I use that in some of our material? So it's not the overt, here's a testimonial that I'd like you to give. Please go run this past your legal team, because nobody likes that process. But in casual conversation, or even the less casual, semi-formal conversation, when it comes up, you ask the permission, and then you can follow up afterwards to say, okay, here's the documentation that allows us to go use this. But it's not overt as, will you give this to me, yes or no? It's more, let's demonstrate the relationship we have together. And if that relationship is strong, then testimonials will naturally come out of it. And then we can use that typically to get over the hump to say, could we build a case study? Could we do something more with you? Because I think, to your point, that kind of content is super valuable to insert back into and support the story, the narrative that we're trying to put into the market.
If you've got a client who's just come up with this testimonial as a result of these conversations, and you think they're charismatic, but they perhaps wouldn't necessarily want to give that same testimonial in video form, are there any tricks you've found to sort of get people over that psychological fear of cameras, to sort of say, all right, great, we can probably get it past legal, we can probably use it in print, in text, etc., but boy, this person's actually charismatic. If we could get them on video, this would just be awesome. It'd be a sales tool. It'd be a marketing tool. We can use it on social, right? Has there ever been sort of any tricks you've found to sort of getting people past that fear of the camera?
It's a hard one. All right. Some people are just afraid of it. I'm a ham. I kind of like it, as you can tell, because we're sitting here doing this.
Right.
There are some people that just never get comfortable being in front of the camera. So what you do is you try to minimize the amount of time that their face is on camera, but use them as a voice or a talkover on B-roll footage. You can do a lot with the B-roll footage. We've done a bunch of different things in the past, and even now at FIS, where we are taking the customer through the relationship about how FIS works with them. We're showing the viewer that story visually with all the different B-roll that we've cut, and just have the voiceover be from that customer voice to specifically say, this is something that we learned by working with this company. They don't have to be on the entire customer story from video perspective, maybe at the very beginning, at the very end, but use their voice all the way throughout so they feel more comfortable. That is one trick. But the other trick, honestly, is just be in person with them. Try to make them feel comfortable. You can make almost anybody feel comfortable if they feel good in the environment that they're in. So, you do this. You send your crews out to go do videos with your customers. And, there's a trick to just making them feel good and feel safe. And also making sure they understand that everything that they say, they have the opportunity to go review later before the world sees it. You can almost always get somebody comfortable in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. To some extent, Zoom and its clones have also, I think, increased people's comfort level with public speaking, because they've been sort of forced to watch themselves do it, and it's become a mandatory replacement for in person. And the camera is now the other person. Basically, it's the other person's on the other side of the camera. So I've noticed things loosen up a little bit. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can run out to their location and throw up some lights and a camera and get them to do the same thing in person. But it's a halfway there substitute, I think.
What's actually kind of cool about that, and this is a question for you, I guess, but when people spend time in this environment on Zoom looking, you watch yourself too. And I remember a long time ago, I worked with a sales guy, and there were days when, and I admit this, I freely admit that I tend to wear my emotions on my sleeve quite often. And I never realized how much you can hear it in someone's voice. And he told me this trick. He's like, put a mirror next to your camera or next to your phone, because when you're on the phone, people can tell when you're upset and they can tell when you're angry. So I put a mirror next to my phone, and I found that I could see my facial features. And if my facial features were portraying I was angry, I sounded angry on the phone. But now you're in video and you can see yourself all the time. And I do find myself catching myself faster, because I know if something's bothering me, it's all over my face and it's all through my voice. So I kind of wonder, if you record people in this environment where they can see themselves and check themselves, is that actually easier or more comfortable for the people you're referencing than being in person with them?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the individual as to whether that makes them more or less uncomfortable with regards to getting that feedback loop, because I think some people are distracted, and I've even had people tell me that they will sort of drag the app around on their screen so they can't see themselves, right? Because they prefer not to get that distraction. And there are actually some platforms that's the default, is not to see yourself, because especially with some of them that are recreating the conference room meeting style, because you don't see yourself when you're in a conference room, right? So why would you see yourself if you're in a virtual conference room? Actually, Howard Lerman, who you probably know, founded Yext. That's one of his new platforms that he's working on, is something to sort of create a virtual office environment, including conference rooms. And I believe their default is that you don't see yourself. You sort of have to manually override it. So it'll be really fascinating to see how that goes as we move closer to the matrix.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I think face-to-face meetings are back, and they're back in full force. So that of course has an impact on the B2B sales channel. We didn't really discuss that as a question, but have the sales team been giving you more feedback about sort of the evolution from sort of Zoom-based selling or Teams or whatever they use as their chosen platform to going back to face-to-face meetings?
Yeah, I've heard some feedback from salespeople, especially as events have made a rise back to prominence in the last 6 months or so. We love being in front of customers. Customers love having you in the room with them. I do think it naturally just goes better when you can realize the person you're talking to is a human being. It's nice to see somebody, but it's much, much better to give them a handshake or a fist bump or whatever it is your preference is these days. So the salespeople I've talked to have just said that being in front of the customers again is wildly more valuable than it has been for the last couple of years. Doing video is a decent substitute, but when it comes to the ask for the deal, or it comes to time to ask for the close, when it comes time to do the follow-ups and really do like a QBR or a monthly business review or a quarterly business review with somebody, you got to do that in person. I just think that the reactions are better. I will tell you this, it's just kind of a tangent to that though. I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago during the height of all the pandemic elements, people had said that the handshake was going to go away because people were just uncomfortable with it. I find it's back with a vengeance. People are so excited to handshake again. Everybody's doing it. Like the fist bump is nice. It's cool. It's a little more casual, but the handshake is back, in a real way at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's interesting. Some traditions have been around for 100 generations probably at this point, and so I don't think they're going away so quickly.
Yeah.
So one thing that
I'm sorry, by the way, but a handshake. I read about this once, that the tradition of a handshake was dominance over the other person. People try to have that really strong handshake to show their dominance. I feel like now they're just enthusiastically happy you're back.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember if it was true or not. I think I read something about, because it's your sword hand, right? It proved that you didn't have a weapon in it. So there's all sorts of backgrounds to it. But clearly it's evolved over time, but the tradition remains. Something that's probably true even more for FIS than some other B2B marketers is, probably there's less and less of the single decision maker, right? These decisions are being made by committees. There are influencers to that committee, some of whom may have veto power. And so, as a marketer supporting those sales teams, right, where they have a very different ecosystem like of selling, how has that changed your marketing strategy? What would you recommend to marketers who are sort of B2B marketers? They're realizing like, okay, it's not just a single person that has full control over this decision process anymore.
Yeah. So I think if you go back to that initial part of the conversation about how it's a nonlinear journey, especially in B2B, definitely B2C, but especially in B2B, we do know all the different elements of the touches that are going to be fulfilled upon throughout that journey. Like we know if you're selling SaaS, someone's going to go to a software review site, someone's going to go to an event, someone's going to go to a webinar, someone's going to go to your website, they're going to go read white papers, they're going to look at the analysts, they're going to talk to other people in their community. We know there are certain things that are always going to happen. And we know that certain people are going to have a weight to each of those touches that's different than other people. So a developer might go to their community, they might go to GitHub, they might go to different places like that to get more insight about how other developers use that product, versus a C-level exec or even an SVP, VP, or director level person. They're going to go find different pieces of information that are valuable to them. So what you have to do is you have to understand why they go to that context or why they go to that community, or what they're looking for, and then insert all the relevant information at every point possible. So that when they come back together, they each have had their own individual needs satisfied from the journey they've taken. Now, it also means that when you have their contact information, when they become first party contact for you, you have to identify who they are, and you've got to deliver the information that's relevant to them. You can't just go out there with a blanket story anymore. The story has to be the sub elements of the story that resonate with you versus you versus you. And so that does make it more difficult. That means that exponentially you've increased the amount of content that you've got to be able to prepare. But I also think that it's really good because now you've actually dove more into the product and the service and the solution that you're selling. You understand it better. And it used to be you could kind of get by with just a little bit of information and just pasting it everywhere. But now you have to get down a little bit more granular. You have to understand the solution that you're selling and the challenge and the benefit that you're trying to solve for. So I feel like it forces marketers to better understand the tools and services that they're selling. And I've kind of always maintained throughout every step of my career that I should be able to walk into a room and tell the salespeople, hey, sit this one out. I'll be able to take it because I should be able to sell as well or better than any other salesperson. Because if I can't, how can I be sure that I'm marketing it properly? I feel like in this world right now, excuse me about that. In this world now, the more that I am able to granularly understand the product I'm selling, the better my marketing to that audience is going to be. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does. It does bring up a related question, which is that, obviously in channels, which are the hand-raising channels, in particular search, right? The person has the problem, they're feeling the pain, they raise their hand, the intent is huge, right?
Yep.
Whereas in B2B marketing in particular, you've got sort of competitive conquest, right? You've got somebody, they may or may not be happy or at least complacent with their current solution, right? Mm-hmm. But you need to figure out how to go in there and sort of shake things up, but not in such a way that you're the messenger who gets shot for bringing the bad news that they're using an inferior product, right? So you have to walk that fine line, right? But you need to, the competitive conquest opportunity is often a really big one because the person has the problems and is solving it a different way. So how does that change your marketing strategy when you sort of feel like you've wrung all the possible demand harvesting out of search, for example, and now you're going to say like, all right, I have to stimulate this demand. I have to sort of create awareness of the fact that there's a solution and that people might have a problem that they may not even acknowledge yet.
Yeah, it's a funny, relevant question. Because I had this exact conversation with somebody about 3 weeks ago. And we were talking about, there's all these different marketing strategies out there. One of them usually is FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. You're trying to instill the fear that you're missing out on an opportunity by going with this partner or this partner. I think FOMO works fine, but there's also the old school FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And which is the idea of you want to drive a wedge between their current choice and the future to help them think or help them spur the idea that maybe I don't have the right partner that I'm going to need in the long term. Now, the problem with FOMO and the problem with FUD is they both start from a point of being very negative. They both start from a negative place. And I don't really think a B2B marketer is going to be successful starting from a negative place, right? To your point, if you market negativity, you will shoot the messenger, so to speak, because nobody likes to be told that their baby's ugly. Nobody likes to be told that their information is wrong, that all the decisions were incorrect, right? Nobody likes that. So that the magic in the B2B component, the magic in the storytelling for a B2B marketer is how do you look at the missing out or the uncertainty and doubt and turn it into a positive? Like, how do you turn that around and make it something where, hey, you know what? Everything you were doing was great. With all the information you had at the time, you made the right decision. But let me give you a little bit more information, which might interest you in such a way to revisit that decision now. And this might be too much information for you, Kevin, but after going through years of therapy, I can tell you that my therapist once said that a long time ago. He's like, every decision you ever made was the right decision at that time with the information you had. But we always talk about hindsight being 20/20 because you have more information later. And that's the magic of the B2B storytelling, is how do you just raise that sliver of maybe there's a better decision now that you have more information.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. What I've done with some of our B2B clients and B2C clients for that matter, but more B2B, is sort of an aspirational hero story, right?
Yeah.
Because if you do in fact solve a problem or solve it better as a result of making the change, you're a hero. It's not that something was necessarily broken, but you took the company or your division or whatever into a new place, and that makes you the hero, right? And so what is that? How does that translate into the individual? Well, obviously it translates into a whole bunch of things within the organization, right? But a lot of the people also internalize that because they realize like, okay, I'll get a raise. Okay, I'll get a promotion. Oh, my next job when I leave is going to be even better, right? Because I'm going to have that as my LinkedIn profile. KPI increased 237% in 1 year, right? So that's the hero. That's the hero objective, because it's a lot easier to sell somebody in being a hero than it is, to seed FOMO or FUD, right?
Yeah.
So we've just found that's been a fun way to message in a B2B context.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because once again, being a hero is positive.
Yeah.
Threatening somebody that you're going to get fired because you made the wrong decision, that's not going to work. I mean, there's that old cliche that in the olden days, right, you never got fired for hiring IBM, right? You would bring them in and they would help you figure out the right way to get to the next step without saying what you did before was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the art of it. It's like everything that that you've done to date was great, but let me help you get greater.
Yeah, let's move to a tactical question, right? Every year, email has been dead, but every year in B2B in particular, email is far from dead, right? And so given how foundational email is to B2B marketing, whether you're doing drip campaigns, or just keeping the information in the CRM, what other push notifications do you think are starting to work in tandem with email now? Because push is great. Once you're sort of adopting either an ABM strategy or drip strategy in B2B, you sort of have to start relying on a little bit more push. So What have you found is working in addition to email on push notifications?
So I'll agree with you on one quick thing you were saying, right? Email is still very valuable. When I read about people saying email is going to die, it's because most of the time they talk about generational to generational. Younger people don't use email as much as maybe we do. And I find that it has nothing to do with the generation, it has to do with life stage. Because in a work environment, email is still very, very dominant. And you're a B2B marketer, you're going to talk to somebody over email. As a consumer, people still talk to you over email. Now, I think that from that push perspective, I hear people use SMS. I'm not personally a fan. I know that can be very effective though, so I wouldn't knock it. I just don't personally like using it. But what I found is that these alternative communication methods are really interesting. So Slack is a great one. I've seen brands create Slack channels with their customers, especially if it's a highly technical customer like a developer. Slack is a great way to push content out and get an immediate response mechanism for it. I've also seen people go and try to use Discord. I haven't figured out the right way to use Discord, but I think
Slack, you and me both on that one.
Yeah, I think that they're both in the same family. But then I also think social. I think things like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, if it survives, even something like a TikTok, depending on who your audience is. I don't think B2B does a whole lot in TikTok. Some do, some don't. But that's another push notification opportunity because you're putting content in front of the audience where they're spending their time. I happen to spend too much time in email, but other people do, other people don't. So I think if you have that permission to talk to me from a first party to first party perspective, all these channels are available to you. I don't think email is going to go away, but I do think, much like in everything else, you have to look at the frequency of it. Right? I can't email my customers 4 times a week and expect to actually get any kind of value out of it. In the same token, I can't post 15 Instagram pictures every day and expect to get anything out of it.
Yeah, I would just add on to the frequency relevance, right? Because the relevance bar is perhaps even more, we found, important than frequency, right? Because people don't mind a slightly higher frequency if it's hyper relevant to them, right?
Sure.
But sometimes that's hard for B2B marketers, is to retain high relevance at any frequency, because you could have a low frequency, and if it's not relevant, that unsubscribe button is 1 click away. And worse, the spam button is the same distance away, and you start getting that clicked, you got a real problem in using email.
Very true.
One other thing I hear, I think too often when I'm out chatting with prospects, in particular on the B2B side, is that they're so hyper focused on customer acquisition that they fail to remember that like the existing customer you have and like increasing revenue there is a marketing opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. And so do you agree that you sort of see too much of that in the folks you chat with, that they're like hyper focused on new customer acquisition and they tend to perhaps not give the level of attention to cross sells and retention that they should?
Yeah, I think retention marketing and also adoption marketing are 2 things that get overlooked. Retention marketing is obviously just keeping your current customers there and keeping them happy. But adoption is getting to use your product more. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody this week about banks and bank customers and millennials specifically. And I think the data point that I saw was that millennials go check their bank account 22 times a month. Now, in the old days, how many times did you go to the bank, right? You went to the bank maybe 3 times a month, and you had a certain value out of that relationship. But millennials go there 22 times a month, and they are engaging with different types of services than anybody ever did before. And so the more you're engaging with them, the more they adopt your platform and your solution suite, the better it is, the better your relationship is going to be with them. So that goes beyond just purely retention. It goes into just becoming a part of their day-to-day existence. So I agree with you that marketers tend to overlook retention marketing, except during recessions, right? They try to defend their base as much as possible. And going into a recession, a lot of people are talking about retention again. But I do think that they even more overlook adoption. I do think a lot of SaaS companies are pretty decent at doing adoption. Like I will get an email from a Slack, or I'll get an email from Trello, or I'll get an email from Zapier and some of those types of companies. And I don't work with any of them, but I use their tools and I will get, ideas from them, inspirations. I will get things that make me look like the hero if I can integrate it into my day. Those types of things I think are great because those are adoption. They're helping me understand new ways to work into my day. And I think more B2B marketers could do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that probably even overlaps into a lot of B2C, right? Stickiness, customer stickiness, which of course translates into LTV, which is one of the key KPIs that people should be focusing on. I think there's probably a lot of levers that marketers forget to pull with regards to increasing LTV, increasing stickiness. And then of course there's a byproduct, if you're a believer in Net Promoter Score, in that tends to go up as you do all of these things as well. So that's sort of an extra silver lining to that opportunity. So those are great points. Do you feel like there are any other mistakes you see B2B marketers making that are sort of no-brainer things that should be foundational, but perhaps they're just not getting to or doing wrong?
I think when it comes to a mistake a B2B marketer will do, I think that they don't make enough room for pure optimization in their storytelling or in their creative development. I've seen, and I talk to a bunch of marketers still on a regular basis, but I've seen where a campaign will go live and they have one piece of creative or one piece of primary content, and they'll push to one landing page, and then they will just blitz that out into the audience they're trying to talk to, and they don't take the tactic up front that they should have 5 or 6 different pieces of creative, or 10 pieces of creative, and 5 to 10 different landing pages, and maybe 10 to 12 different pieces of content, so you can mix and match and have different permutations of that, because that gives you more information to work with to optimize a campaign. Right? You can't put all your eggs in the one basket, and this is the problem I have with overall creativity. It's subjective, and I don't like subjectivity. I could give you a piece of creative and I give somebody else a piece of creative, and you're both going to give me different feedback on it. Oh, I don't like this, I like that. And it's going to be completely different. And if I go to 20 people, I'm going to get 22 different responses. I like to take the subjectivity out of it. And in many cases, I actually like to use the tools at our disposal to automate the delivery of that. Like if I can identify who this person is and what kind of content they've looked at in the past, or what kind of behavior they've shown in the past, and then I can hypothesize the right piece of content and the right landing page to give to them, it removes the subjectivity and hopefully works better. But if you really go out with a singular story, a singular piece of content, and a singular narrative, there's a lot of people that's going to go right past them. And if you're doing that as a B2B marketer, there's a lot of people in your target audience that you can convert into an opportunity for you, but you can't do it with one message. You've got to go out there with different messages, because certain things are going to resonate. Certain things are going to have that point of epiphany at different moments. And if you go out with one, you might just bypass 50% of the target you wanted to go after, and they're not going to help you.
On the flip side to that, is there a point at which you're creating too much content? So how far is too far down the sort of content creation rabbit hole? Obviously, one size fits all is probably not a prudent strategy. Developing creative for different personas or decision makers and their particular problems they're solving or their personal KPIs could be really useful. But, beyond a certain point, it probably becomes cost prohibitive, not just to create, but to test, because you need a statistically valid sample in each of the times that you test it. Otherwise, you have no idea if it worked or not. So any best thoughts on best practices for that? Like, is there a one size fits all, or is there sort of a mathematical solution to that?
No, I don't think there's a one size fits all. There is a mathematical solution. I will tell you that I have one of the tools that I like is I built this relatively good, relatively deep forecasting model for how to go spend dollars for a B2B campaign. And in it, you can surmise the amount of creative and content and copy that you're going to need to work with. But I would say that you kind of hit the nail on the head a minute ago when you talked about the statistically relevant sample size. You basically have to look at what's your sales cycle from a length of time perspective, what size is the audience that you're going to go after, and use those two things to try and figure out what do you estimate for wear out for any individual piece of creative content. Or how many pieces of content do you think anybody can actually swallow before they come to have a conversation with you? So I think there's a bit of a testing mechanism in there too. And this is where the art of it comes back in. Like, there is a scientific component that I tend to over-index towards, but there is an art to basically saying, what do we think is too much?
Yeah, a related point, I think, on the art and science of that is, for B2B marketers who have go after several segments from enterprise all the way down, right? Mm-hmm. The more enterprise the client or prospect tends to be, the longer the sales cycle, right? Yeah. So that data flows in much more slowly, right? And so here you have KPIs coming in off of your marketing campaigns, and some of it's maybe looking great, and right, you're starting to optimize against it, but you're leaving out the whales, right? Because the whale data, that'll be there in 6 months, right? Yeah. So I think you have to be really careful, right? As you look for sample sizes and you start to optimize campaigns, that you don't pre-optimize and forget about the fact that the sales cycle looks different depending on whether it's a whale, and the whales tend to be like in the 90-10 or 80-20 rule. They're the ones you really want. So you do not want to be ignoring that data. Sometimes you have to be patient and like go back and revisit the data in another 6 months.
Yeah. There's one other thing there too, Kevin, which is that marketing and sales have to be working together. And if the two organizations aren't literally intertwined in that little double helix type of a model, then you're going to miss out on even more signals, because we can follow a lead score all the way through. We can follow somebody through a Salesforce, stage to stage type of a journey, but you need the qualitative feedback from the sales team to try and figure out what piece of content got that customer or prospect over the hump. Mm-hmm. What was it that helped you either qualify or disqualify them earlier in the conversation? Because the more you have that feedback loop, which is not a quantitative feedback loop. You can have all the pull downs you want in Salesforce or Dynamics, and you can have all that piece of information that's fed back into a demand base or a sixth sense, but you got to have that qualitative feedback from the sales team to go back and help you from a content development perspective. If you're not doing that, all this other stuff is going to be great, but you're still going to miss the faster close. To your point, the whales, a lot of that is qualitative feedback.
Yeah.
And what we've seen, and what I've seen some other marketers do recently is, having the handoff from a traditional campaign to an account-based marketing campaign. That is almost always a qualitative decision based on where are they, what do we feel the opportunity is. Do we think if we go to a pure ABM model, we're going to be able to deliver them faster? If so, let's push them over into that mechanism.
Right. Yeah, those are excellent points. You mentioned how retention marketing becomes a little bit more in vogue as people believe a recession is coming, and we have no idea whether 2023 will be a recession or not, but people are already sort of concerned. So what other strategic changes should B2B marketers make as they sort of plan for maybe longer sales cycles in a recessionary environment?
I don't know, actually. I wish I knew the answer to that one yet.
Well, if we do that, we didn't have to work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the only thing I can think of is you want to make sure you have that back and forth again, the educational component with your customers during this period of time, because if they feel like they are just a stone that's being squeezed for more blood, then they're not going to feel good about it. Right? If you can take the time during a recession to give them more information and not ask for anything, like if you can be patient enough to just invest in the relationship without asking for something out of it, I think you can be more effective coming out of a recession. I think that the best relationships, and funny enough, like every company that I've ever been involved in, we built during a recession or an economic downswing. And so I find that the more that you can engage in that education and increasing the strength and the value of that relationship without asking for something, the better you're going to be coming out. I mean, we did that with Blue Kai. We did that in some other examples, but just invest in the relationship during this period of time because it will be stronger as a result.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because people remember and you get rewarded for that. As far as next year, what has you excited about next year? Is it maybe industry-wide platforms, technologies, disruption? There's a lot of everything going on.
Yeah. I haven't sat down to think yet. I haven't been able to put a cap on 22 yet to figure out what 23 is going to look like.
Right.
I think it's going to be interesting because there's still so much change. Okay. And I had a different conversation with somebody the other day, and they were telling me that they did a research piece against a lot of senior level marketers, and marketers and even just business owners are tired of disruption. They are tired of the rate of change. I mean, how much change have we dealt with the last 3 years, 4 years, the last 10 years, 15 years, the last 25 plus years? I mean, everything always seems like it's the biggest change ever. And it used to be that those changes happened every 7 years or so. Now that felt like they're more like every 3 to 5 years. Some big disruption comes into the market. So we're all kind of tired. That being said, we're going into another year with more change. And coming out of the pandemic and going into a recession is going to be very, very interesting waters to try and navigate. So I honestly think that I'm looking forward to next year as an opportunity to take one small breath and absorb all the stuff that we just learned. Absorb and start to process this, the push and pull of people trying to push return to work with people wanting to work from home. Push the push away from, say, cash and physical currency to digital payments and all that kind of stuff. I think I want to understand a little bit more about how these types of embedded experiences will operate versus more traditional, go to an individual retailer, go to an individual company for a suite of services. I want to understand how people are going to adopt all these and how much they're going to stick. And I think if we can do that for a year, it would be kind of nice. It would be kind of nice and not be disrupted for 1 year.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but obviously as venture capital money becomes tight and money becomes tighter in general with rising interest rates, there'll be less people out there building shiny objects to distract us from the stuff that we're still trying to figure out how to optimize around that works already, that we know works, so that we don't have to sort of make that difficult choice between the shiny object and the tried and true parts of our marketing strategies and channels that work. So yeah, perhaps that'll be a byproduct of the sort of capital crunch that hits the tech community, the ad tech, the martech community, and the publishing community. So I agree. It'll be great to take a deep breath and figure out how to squeeze more juice out of the lemons we already have.
Yeah. There's another good analogy is that I like music, and one of the artists that I've always kind of liked is Ryan Adams. Ryan Adams put out something like 6 records in the last 3 months. I can't tell you if any of them are any good. It's too much. It's too much information. It's too many records all at the same time. The Chili Peppers put out 2 records in the last 6 months, and it's a lot of music to try and digest, especially when I don't have the time that I used to sit down and listen to music. Whereas if you put out a record every couple of years, you see what Taylor Swift does. She puts out a record every couple of years. People have time to digest it and just analyze it and figure it all out. There's something to be said for spacing out some of the disruption, spacing it out a little bit.
Yep. And that way Ticketmaster can hold their act together.
I go back to in Gen X, Pearl Jam was fighting Ticketmaster, and it was not cool back then, but now it's cool.
Right. Well, on that note, Cory, thanks so much for joining me to discuss marketing strategy, particularly the B2B side, which I think not a lot of folks delve into as deeply as you do. So thanks for sharing your wisdom there.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening. And I really do appreciate it, Kevin. Keep up the good stuff.
Will do. Thanks.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.